Hello and welcome to Studies in Archaic Buddhism, whatever part we're on. I am your host, Panyo Basa, and I'm making things a little more challenging for me by coming out into a wilderness area to do this video, where there's like all kinds of picturesque distractions and things going on, just to keep me on my toes, so to speak. And today's study is going to be from the Majjhima Nikaya. It's going to be Sutta number 74 from the Majjhima Nikaya, which is the Dīghanakha Sutta. And I think it's fair to say that it's another composite sutta containing both really old and not so old material, similar to the Sakapanya Sutta that I did previously, for reasons that I'll get into after I've read the sutta. But one interesting thing about this sutta is that it is, according to tradition, according to the sutta itself, it is this sutta which caused the Buddha's chief disciple Sariputta to become fully enlightened. Upon listening to this sutta, the Sariputta had just been a monk for a few weeks at this time, according to tradition, and he was standing there fanning the Buddha while the Buddha was giving this discourse to a non-Buddhist ascetic named Dīghanakha. And Dīghanakha literally means long fingernails. So he's probably some kind of grubby ascetic type. And also, according to tradition, he was the nephew of Sariputta, which may have caused Sariputta to have a greater interest in what the Buddha was saying. So it's not a very long one, so I'll just read the whole thing. And I'm not reading my own translation because I've never translated this myself. It's from this classic, probably the best translation of the Majjhima Nikaya that I know of, which is, it's Bhikkhu Nyanamoli's translation that was doctored up by Bhikkhu Bodhi. It's based on Nyanamoli's translation, and then Bhikkhu Bodhi just kind of got rid of most of the idiosyncratic translations and so forth that Nyanamoli was into, and I won't go into that too much. So I'll just, without any further ado, I'll just read the sutta, and then we can get into a little bit of commentary afterwards. So this again is Majjhima Nikaya number 74, the Dīghanakha Sutta, or the discourse to long fingernails. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Rajagaha in the Boar's Cave on the mountain Vulture Peak. Then the wanderer Dīghanakha went to the Blessed One and exchanged greetings with him. When this courteous and amiable talk was finished, he stood at one side and said to the Blessed One, Master Gotama, my doctrine and view is this: nothing is acceptable to me. This view of yours, Agiwesana, nothing is acceptable to me, is not at least that view acceptable to you? In this view of mine, if this view of mine were acceptable to me, Master Gotama, it too would be the same. It too would be the same. Well, Agiwesana, there are plenty in the world who say, it too would be the same, it too would be the same, yet they do not abandon that view, and they take up still some other view. Those are few in the world who say, it too would be the same, it too would be the same, and who abandon that view, and do not take up some other view. Agiwesana, there are some recluses and Brahmins whose doctrine and view is this: everything is acceptable to me. There are some recluses and Brahmins whose doctrine and view is this: nothing is acceptable to me. Nothing is acceptable to me. And there are some recluses and Brahmins whose doctrine and view is this: something is acceptable to me, something is not acceptable to me. Among these, the view of those recluses and Brahmins who hold the doctrine and view everything is acceptable to me is close to lust, close to bondage, close to delighting, close to holding, close to clinging. The view of those recluses and Brahmins who hold the doctrine and view nothing is acceptable to me is close to non-lust, close to non-bondage, close to non-delighting, close to non-holding, close to non-clinging. When this was said, the wanderer Dīghanakha remarked, Master Gotama commends my point of view. Master Gotama recommends my point of view. Agiwesana, as to those recluses and Brahmins who hold the doctrine and view, something is acceptable to me, something is not acceptable to me. The view of theirs as to what is acceptable is close to lust, close to bondage, close to delighting, close to holding, close to clinging. while the view of theirs as to what is not acceptable is close to non-lust, close to non-bondage, close to non-delighting, close to non-holding, close to non-clinging. Now, Aggiwesana, a wise man among those recluses and Brahmins who holds the doctrine in view, everything is acceptable to me, considers thus: if I obstinately adhere to my view, everything is acceptable to me, and declare only this is true, anything else is wrong, then I may clash with the two others, with a recluse or Brahmin who holds the doctrine in view, nothing is acceptable to me, and with a recluse or Brahmin who holds the doctrine in view, something is acceptable to me, something is not acceptable to me. I may clash with these two, and when there is a clash, there are disputes. When there are disputes, there are quarrels. When there are quarrels, there is vexation. Foreseeing for himself clashes, disputes, quarrels, and vexation, he abandons that view and does not take up some other view. This is how there comes to be the abandoning of these views. This is how there comes to be the relinquishing of these views. The wise man among those recluses and Brahmins who holds the doctrine in view, nothing is acceptable to me, considers thus: if I obstinately adhere to my view, nothing is acceptable to me, and declare only this is true, anything else is wrong, then I may clash with the two others, with a recluse or Brahmin who holds the doctrine in view, everything is acceptable to me, and with a recluse or Brahmin who holds the doctrine in view, something is acceptable to me, something is not acceptable to me. I may clash with these two, and when there is a clash, there are disputes. When there are disputes, there are quarrels. When there are quarrels, there is vexation. Foreseeing for himself clashes, disputes, quarrels, and vexation, he abandons that view and does not take up some other view. This is how there comes to be the abandoning of these views. This is how there comes to be the relinquishing of these views. A wise man among those recluses and Brahmins who hold the doctrine in view, something is acceptable to me, something is not acceptable to me, considers thus: if I obstinately adhere to my views, something is acceptable to me, something is not acceptable to me, and declare only this is true, anything else is wrong, then I may clash with the two others, with a recluse or Brahmin who holds the doctrine in view, everything is acceptable to me, and with a recluse or Brahmin who holds the doctrine in view, nothing is acceptable to me. I may clash with these two, and when there is a clash, there are disputes. When there are disputes, there are quarrels. When there are quarrels, there is vexation. Foreseeing for himself clashes, disputes, quarrels, and vexation, he abandons that view and does not take up some other view. This is how there comes to be the abandoning of these views. This is how there comes to be the relinquishing of these views. Now, Aggiwesana, this body made of material form, consisting of the four great elements, procreated by a mother and father, built up out of boiled rice and porridge, is subject to impermanence, to being worn and rubbed away, to dissolution and disintegration. It should be regarded as impermanent, as suffering, as a disease, as a tumor, as a dart, as a calamity, as an affliction, as alien, as disintegrating, as void, as not self. When one regards this body thus, one abandons desire for the body, affection for the body, subservience for the body. There are, Aggiwesana, three kinds of feeling: pleasant feeling, painful feeling, and neither painful nor pleasant feeling. On the occasion when one feels pleasant feeling, one does not feel painful feeling, or neither painful nor pleasant feeling. On that occasion, one feels only pleasant feeling. On the occasion when one feels painful feeling, one does not feel pleasant feeling, or neither painful nor pleasant feeling. On that occasion, one feels only painful feeling. On the occasion when one feels neither painful nor pleasant feeling, one does not feel pleasant feeling or painful feeling. On that occasion, one feels only neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Pleasant feeling, Aggiwesana, is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, vanishing, fading away, and ceasing. Painful feeling, too, is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, vanishing, fading away, and ceasing. Neither painful nor pleasant feeling, too, is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, vanishing, fading away, and ceasing. Seeing thus, a well-taught noble disciple becomes disenchanted with pleasant feeling, disenchanted with painful feeling, disenchanted with neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Being disenchanted, he becomes dispassionate. Through dispassion, his mind is liberated. When it is liberated, there comes the knowledge it is liberated. He understands. Birth is destroyed. The holy life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There is no more coming to any state of being. A bhikkhu whose mind is liberated thus, Aggiwesana, sides with none and disputes with none. He employs the speech currently used in the world without adhering to it. Now on that occasion the Venerable Sariputta was standing beside the Blessed One, fanning him. Then he thought, the Blessed One indeed speaks of the abandoning of these things through direct knowledge. The Sublime One indeed speaks of the relinquishing of these things through direct knowledge. As the Venerable Sariputta considered this, through not clinging, his mind was liberated from the taints. But in the wanderer Dīghanakha, the spotless, immaculate vision of the Dhamma arose. All that is subject to arising is subject to cessation. The wanderer Dīghanakha saw the Dhamma, attained the Dhamma, understood the Dhamma, fathomed the Dhamma. He crossed beyond doubt, did away with perplexity, gained intrepidity, and became independent of others in the teacher's dispensation. Then he said to the Blessed One, Magnificent Master Gautama, magnificent Master Gautama. Master Gautama has made the Dhamma clear in many ways, as though he were turning upright what had been overthrown, revealing what was hidden, showing the way to one who was lost, or holding up a lamp in the dark for those with eyesight to see forms. I go to Master Gautama for refuge, and to the Dhamma, and to the Sangha of bhikkhus. From today, let Master Gautama remember me as a lay follower who has gone to him for refuge for life. And that's the end of the sutta. And if you were following along with this, you may have noticed that it starts off with really, it's beyond skepticism, and then gradually gets it is as though there's like later material added more and more at the end. So for starters, this entire sutta could be less than half as long as it is with no loss of information whatsoever. It's just very repetitive in a tedious kind of way, which helped ancient monks to memorize it by heart, but nevertheless, nobody really talks that way in real life, including Gautama Buddha, I'm pretty sure. So, I guess I can do a little bit of commentary going through this, like when Dīghanakha comes to the Buddha and says, nothing is acceptable to me. The commentaries are claiming that when he says nothing is acceptable to me, that it means that the idea of rebirth or any kind of afterlife is not acceptable to him, which the context clearly belies. This is just an example of how unreliable the commentaries can be, because just the very context just contradicts what the commentarial tradition is saying. Also, apparently, when the Buddha is calling Dīghanakha Agivesana, he's calling him by his family name. He knows his real name, even though he goes by the nickname of Long Fingernails. So, when Dīghanakha is saying nothing is acceptable to me, the Buddha just points out, well, that idea that nothing is acceptable to you is acceptable to you, isn't it? And then Dīghanakha says, well, even that, it's like I can take it or leave it. And the Buddha just points out, well, there are very few people who can take it or leave it who actually leave it. That most people, they'll claim that they don't believe anything, and then they believe that they don't believe anything, and it turns out they believe other stuff besides. So then he's pointing out that at least not believing anything is closer to an enlightened point of view than believing anything. And then Agivesana, or Dīghanakha, is kind of delighted by that. He thinks the Buddha is praising him, or at least, he's acknowledging that his point of view is wiser than most points of view, or pretty much any point of view, because the ideal is no point of view at all. And then it gets into some, I guess you'd call it philosophy, that is very reminiscent of some of the sutras of the Atthakavagga, where it's saying that if you believe something, then you're going to be disagreeing with other people, which is going to lead to contentions and disputes and arguments and suffering. That's a common refrain in certain suttas of the Atthakavagga, which does cause this to resemble the Atthakavagga a lot, and especially the very beginning part where the Buddha is saying, even to believe that you don't believe anything is too much. So then, after talking about how you shouldn't have any point of view, that even believing that you don't believe anything is too much, then he gets into what I consider to be a later addition, which is where he starts, now Agivesana, this body made of material form, consisting of the four great elements, procreated by a mother and father, and built up out of boiled rice and porridge, is subject to impermanence, to being worn and rubbed away, to dissolution and disintegration. It should be regarded as impermanent, as suffering, as a disease, as a tumor, as a dart, as a calamity, as an affliction, as alien, as disintegrating, as void, as not self, etc. He keeps going in this vein, and that is beliefs. It's strange that you've got a sutta where the Buddha is saying, even to believe that you don't believe anything is too much. That's one too many beliefs. And then towards the end, he starts just giving standard Theravadan orthodox stuff, which is just chock full of beliefs. I mean, you wouldn't be saying this stuff if you didn't want people to believe it. So it's clearly, to me, a kind of composite. You've got like this nucleus of something really old that's reminiscent of the Atthaka Wagga, and then, like certain other things I've already discussed, like the Sakapanya Sutta, you've got later stuff added onto it, maybe in part to make it seem more orthodox. I mean, you can't really change old stuff that's pre-orthodox, that's just too well known to change, because then thered be an uproar among, ancient monks at least. And so you have to add more orthodox stuff onto it to make the whole thing seem more orthodox, or at least that's my hypothesis. And then at the end here, where it's saying that the Venerable Sariputta was fanning the Buddha, and as the Venerable Sariputta considered this, through not clinging, his mind was liberated from the taints, or the asawas. Taints is Bhikkhu Bodhi's favorite rendering of the word asawa, which I would translate as encumbering influence. I've gone over this in a previous video, but taints I don't think is that great of a rendering for it. And then it follows that it mentions Sariputta becoming fully enlightened, like an arahant. Then it says, but in the wanderer Dīghanakha, the spotless, immaculate vision of the Dhamma arose. All that is subject to arising is subject to cessation. And that is the classic description of someone who becomes a Sotapanna, which is like the lowest level of a Buddhist saint who has had at least a glimpse of Nibbana and can't backslide. He is destined to become enlightened within the next 7 lifetimes. And then at the very end is just standard. I mean, it's hardly likely that this part could belong to the oldest stratum of Buddhist texts. It's when Dīghanakha gives the standard speech of conversion. Magnificent Master Gotama, magnificent Master Gotama. Master Gotama has made the Dhamma clear in many ways, as though he were turning upright what had been overthrown, revealing what was hidden, showing the way to one who was lost, or holding up a lamp in the dark for those with eyesight to see forms, etc., which is verbatim the exact same speech that dozens of people give to the Buddha after he converts them to Buddhism. And it's just not very likely, in my opinion, to say the least. And while I'm at it, while I'm in the commentary section here, I did look up what G.C. Pandey says about the Dīghanakha Sutta. And this, for those of you that haven't already been told by me in previous videos, this is one of the best books you can get for understanding what really early primordial Buddhism was like. And so, in his early and late in the Majjhima Nikaya, he includes Sutta 74, the Dīghanakha Sutta, as a composite sutta, which contains earlier and later material, which I agree with. And he says, Sutta 74 depicts the Buddha as a thoroughgoing skeptic, one who would not hold even the skeptical thesis itself, but that's really kind of a misunderstanding. The Buddha was not a skeptic. When the Buddha says, don't believe anything, don't hold to any view, it's not because of skepticism, it's because you can't understand the truth intellectually or perceptually. If you're going to understand absolute reality, the highest truth, you're not going to do it through your thinking mind. So the Buddha was a mystic more than a skeptic. I mean, at like a lower level, skepticism and this kind of radical mysticism are indistinguishable, but the skeptic says you can't know reality, you can't know the truth, whereas the Buddha is just saying you can't know reality, you can't know the truth through the perceiving mind, through symbols. You're going to have to experience it directly, and that is enlightenment. So then later, in the same little blurb here, he says, this sutta seems to represent an early strand of thought. It only expresses more logically and very uncompromisingly that opposition to holding any opinion, or diti, literally view, which is found prominently even in the earliest texts. For example, in the Atthaka Vagga of the Sutta Nipata. So I consider the Dīghanakha Sutta to be one of the oldest fragments, or the oldest parts of the Majjhima Nikaya. It's sort of like I've read in a Bible commentary that the Song of Deborah in the Book of Judges is the oldest part of the Old Testament, with the Book of Judges itself being rather old. And maybe the Atthaka Vagga could be like the Song of Deborah for Pali texts, with the Sutta Nipata itself being like the Book of Judges. But this is a fragment of approximately as old material that's found in the Majjhima Nikaya, partly because it got expanded into a longer sutta, too long to fit in the Sutta Nipata maybe, just by adding this later material and just sort of puffing it up. So you probably have this nucleus of possibly an actual meeting with the wanderer Dīghanakha, who may or may not have really been Sariputta's nephew, and this sutta may or may not really have caused the enlightenment, the full enlightenment of Sariputta, but nevertheless, there's a good chance, it seems to me, just going with intuition, I suppose, that this is like recording of some version, if maybe a paraphrase of an actual meeting that happened that was such a big deal that it got recorded or memorized, and then later on it just got added onto, partly just because it was such a profound teaching to begin with. And so I guess I've had my say on that one, and so my sweetheart and I are going to get up from this rock, and we're going to walk through the forest a little more and be happy.